In 1985, this was the line to see the just-released James Bond film, A View to a Kill. This year, if you wanted to watch Bond, James Bond, you didn't have to wait at all. It was available on demand within days of its theatrical release. Giving moviegoers the option of watching at home has become increasingly common because, let's face it, going to a theater isn't all that popular during a pandemic. And that has a lot of people wondering if watching movies the way we used to will ever come back. So I talked with two experts about where they think things are at right now and how important the holiday box office will be to the future of film.
I think movies are back for hardcore movie fans. I don't think movie theaters are back for the average consumer. For example, going on a date, just looking for something to see that weekend. That crowd has tended to not show up since the pandemic.
And really all that we want is some sort of normalcy. And when will we get that? Obviously we don't know, but it feels like with each passing month, we get a little bit closer to stability in the marketplace. The problem is that the stability in the marketplace might end up looking very different than the stability of the marketplace pre-pandemic. And what I mean by that is there's a sizable chunk of the audience which may be lost. So the new normal might be a much smaller film-going audience than before.
It turns out that moviegoers are pretty evenly split when it comes to their interest in going to the theater. Half tend to be avid film buffs, and the other half could take it or leave it. At least, that's what Decorum, a film research and data firm founded by David Herron, learned from a study they did. More specifically, 13% had been going, but stopped when the Delta variant emerged. 29% stopped going when the pandemic started initially, but say they hope to go back someday. And 8% said they were likely lost from the theater crowd altogether. The holiday box office is important because it's likely to show us if these data points are on target.
There's a seasonality to the box office. And one way to think about the holiday box office is if you think of that period between December 24th, Christmas Eve, and like January 2nd, New Year's Day, the day after. That's almost like a 8 or 9 day weekend, right? So people just flood to the movie theaters during that period of time. And part of the reason why we get this onslaught of new films during that window is because people go more than once, right? So, and they go as a family. So you get a cross-section of titles that appeal to different audiences.
But now, people no longer had to make the trip to see their favorite films. When the pandemic closed communal spaces like theaters, the movie studios started releasing films direct to consumer. They were streamed on apps like Disney+, HBO Max, and Peacock, which is owned by our parent company, NBC Universal. On his podcast, Mad About Movies, Kent Garrison says in many cases, people liked the view from home.
There is still a huge market out there of adults and older people and younger people and families that love the theatrical experience. And so once you start to see that profit margin dwindle for the studio and then start to say, okay, well, we can make more money if we just go direct to consumer, I think that's when the real breaking point is going to be. But right now, there's still so much money to be made in the theater that it's still kind of worth it for everybody involved to do that. And so that's what is going to happen. But I still think the window from when you see a movie in theaters to when it's on demand is getting shorter and shorter.
But it's just not the pandemic that's making things difficult for theaters. The writing's been on the wall for some time. The Decorum found 3 driving factors for why folks haven't returned to the big screen. Concerns over safety is definitely up there, but so is price sensitivity and the theater experience. Those issues existed long before COVID.
We have to cut the theater some slack, first and foremost, right? They had a really rough year and a half. And so this idea of building new seats, those are high infrastructure costs that really many of them can't do at this moment. AMC is doing things where they're introducing a line of popcorn, branded popcorn that's going to be sold in kiosks and malls around the country. And they're doing these sort of NFTs for Spider-Man. Anybody who buys a ticket gets. So they're trying to create different revenue streams. But I think the thing that is the real challenge for them is to address some of the fundamental issues with the movie-going experience itself and not focus so much on the ancillary revenue streams. And that's hard And at the same time, they're trying to serve two different masters. On one hand, you've got audiences who are very, very price sensitive and feel that going to the movies is very expensive, and in particular, the concessions. One of the things that we saw in our study was that one of the things that would drive people to go back to the theater if the price of those basic concessions, popcorn, soda, candy, went down. The flip side of that is that we've got people who want a real premium experience and who want higher end concessions and higher end food options and want better seats and don't want to see commercials in front of the movie. And so the theaters have to figure out a way to sort of address both of those needs.
You may have noticed that this year there's fewer holiday-themed movies than in years past. It's intentional. The studios and theaters want movies with the widest appeal and the longest shelf life possible, with hopes they'll mitigate any slump. They'll know if it worked sometime in February. That's when the studios and theaters will calculate a final tally of the holiday run.
I've always been a proponent that if I can pay more to stay at home, I will do that, just because I've had some bad theater experiences and I prefer knowing what I'm gonna get. And so that's what we really hope happens, is that the on-demand stuff just starts becoming more natural. But there's always going to be a nostalgic place for movie theaters in people's minds. I think there's always going to be a place for them. There's always going to be a business there. How big of a business, I don't know, but we might compare it to the video rental industry when it was starting to dwindle out. There was still a market for it, but it was smaller and smaller. And now that they're gone, people want video rental stores again, and VHS is becoming a huge thing. So I think it'll be the same with movie theaters. I think you'll see a lot of independent theaters pop up, drive-in movie theaters. Those nostalgic experiences are going to start becoming a lot more popular.